So if my last video didn't make it kinda obvious, I adore fighting games. And as a lot of my upload history shows, I also love Sonic the Hedgehog, so naturally the idea of putting these two things together sounds quite appealing to me. And there have been multiple attempts in the past, both official and fan-made, to see this idea come to light. But I think most people agree that it would be cool to see SEGA give this concept another shot, and today, I'd like to imagine what the roster of a Sonic fighting game might look like, who would be selected, and how could they play. Now, I'm going to set up a few ground rules. I'm going to try and keep a delicate balance in this video between what I'd like to see and what I think SEGA would actually do. So, say for example, I'd like to see Sally Acorn in the roster. I'd have to consider if SEGA would make that call, and I personally don't think they would. So, she probably won't be on here. Spoiler alert, I'm going to be very limited in what alternate continuities I'm allowed to dip my hands into. I'm also going to be frugal about the roster size too. Theoretically, there isn't a lot of ways outside the obvious market research SEGA could know for certain how well a Sonic fighting game would perform, and for that reason, I'm going to keep the roster relatively small with 14 characters at launch, and I'm also going to speculate a season pass with 5 DLC characters. As releasing a fighting game with no plans of DLC in this day and age is a death sentence for fighting games' longevity, sadly. One final rule is it has to be modern canon characters. Sadly, if they're a classic era exclusive, I'm not going to be putting them in the roster, mainly for the reason of keeping it to what I believe SEGA would actually do, SEGA clearly not wanting to mix modern and classic too much, sadly. So that means no Mighty, no Ray, no Honey, no Trip, and so on. I will also be playing random Sonic music in the background that I believe would be the character's fight theme, so without further ado, let's spin dash right into this. Character 1, Sonic. Obviously, our first character is Sonic himself. I'm choosing One Way Dream as his theme instead of something like It Doesn't Matter or His World because I imagine SEGA would want to swing with the Frontiers hype, assuming this game would be coming out around this period of time. Now, as for playstyle, most main characters in fighting games tend to be an archetype known as Shoto, which refers to an all-rounder character with good options at any range, but I felt there was one fighting game archetype that fits Sonic too perfectly to make him a Shoto. Sonic would be a rushdown character, a playstyle focusing on getting in close and overwhelming your foes with fast combos and mix-ups that force them to guess for their life. He could use things like spin dashes or light dashes to get in close quickly, and then have tons of mix-up options. As rushdowns tend to be though, his defensive game would be very tough due to having lower durability. You could potentially give him the Grand Slam from Frontiers as a parry move to help him in defense, that kinda would work similar to Baiken's parry from Guilty Gear. One last note though about Sonic is that I'd want one of his supers to be an install super. Essentially, a super that just puts a buff or transformation on the user. This would obviously be Super Sonic, and like Soul Bad Guy's Dragon install in Guilty Gear Xrd, it would hijack the music, replacing whatever is playing with Undefeatable. How terrifying would it be to fight a Sonic player and then suddenly you just hear... So yeah, slot 1, obviously, is going to the rushdown Sonic. Character number 2, Tails. Another obvious pick, Tails would be a staple for this roster that we can't miss. Now, as for his playstyle, I believe Tails could be a zoner, a character that focuses on attacking from a distance. He could use his gadgets and air mobility to play keep away with the opponent, and obviously he'd have more air options than most characters with some clean air buttons to punish a desperate player trying to jump in past his zoning moves, forcing the opponent into a war of attrition like a true zoner. He could use things like his arm cannons from Battle of Lost World, throw wrenches like in Frontiers, and other such projectile moves, and as for a super move, time to call in the Cyclone Plane for a massive laser attack. This could be useful for getting an opponent off of you if they manage to get in, because if someone manages to break through your pressure and you don't have a super ready, you could be in some serious trouble. So yeah, slot 2 is going to the zoner character, Tails. Character number 3! Dr. Eggman. You probably thought this was going to be Knuckles, huh? And don't worry, we'll get to old Knucklehead, but the archetype I'd want Knuckles to be requires introducing another archetype first, which Eggman would be. This is the Grappler, a slow, heavy character focused on hard-hitting but equally hard-to-land grabbing attacks that punish an opponent's reckless play or poor positioning. Eggman would be piloting a form of Eggmobile with legs and big grabby arms for all that grappling action, and he'd probably have a few missiles attached, possibly for a short-range projectile or to rapid-fire a captured prey, similar to Potemkin's Heat Knuckle in Guilty Gear. Eggman could be an intimidating foe that requires you to keep your cool and prepare for when he goes for grabs. Fighting Eggman would be like taking on a towering wall that's slowly approaching and you're running out of space to run. As all grapplers need though, you'd want one of his supers to be a command grab that's an absolute spectacle. For instance, maybe he could grab you, throw you in a Space Colony Arc escape pod that he proceeds to grab and fly out into the sky, and then throw you straight back down, laughing maniacally all the way. And that's why I think Eggman, as a grappler, will be getting our 3rd character slot. Character number 4! Amy Rose. Knuckles fans, chill, we'll get to him. But we need some girl power in this roster, so let's bring in the quintessential Sonic girl, Amy Rose herself. So obviously, Amy would be using her hammer as the main force of damage, using her attacks to annoy and force opponents into the corner. A cutesy, love-struck girl wielding a comically huge weapon, crushing her opponents with heavyweight attacks? Why does that sound familiar? I may be imagining things. Anyway, so I think it's a good time to discuss charge inputs, inputs that require you to hold one direction for a second or so, and then press the opposite direction to input. I believe Amy would be a charge character using her hammer to bring out powerful but punishable attacks to prevent it from being tempting to spam opponents. She could also throw her tarot card as a projectile to annoy opponents trying to bait her. Okay, jokes from earlier aside, it's pretty clear I'm inspiring her playstyle on May from Guilty Gear. I'm using this game as an example a lot, I know, but it's just my favorite fighting game. I imagine this character being a bit of a noob killer because of their May inspirations, but hey, you gotta learn how to play somehow. So that's what I would do for our 4th character, Amy. Character number 5, Knuckles the Echidna. Here we finally are at the Knuckle Zone, and we can finally introduce you to the Combo Grappler, which is the archetype I'd have Knuckles fall under. A combo grappler is a mashup of grapplers and rushdowns that use command grabs to get combos going, and Knuckles I think would lend himself to this really well. He grabs you, gets a combo going, and ends it with a move where he drill runs you right into the ground. Knuckles wouldn't be as fast as Sonic, but his combos would hit with more force and punish any overconfident foes by making them hold a command grab that leads into even more of a beatdown. Knuckles, I imagine, would also have some good air-to-air buttons, being able to seamlessly glide into some good air attacks and dragon punches. I think Knuckles' main issue would be getting in to start the combos though, because aside from some good air-to-airs, I don't imagine he would have a lot of options to getting on his opponent, meaning a more long-range enemy may prove a challenge in the neutral game. Ultimately though, I think the combo grappler Knuckles would be a great character for slot number 5. Character slot number 6 is going to our first modern era character, Cream the Rabbit. There is one fighting game archetype that fits Cream perfectly, the Puppet Fighter. A puppet character is defined by having a second entity alongside the character that the player must control as well, and Cream has her Chow companion, Cheese. Much like in Sonic Advance 2, she'd be using Cheese to harass enemies from afar, and while it would require more technical prowess than in that game, in the right hands, Cream could be an absolute demon that sits back and watches her Chow companion tear you to bits. That's right, fear the bunny's wrath, and pray to Solaris for salvation! Anywho, I think a cool super and advanced free throwback could be her summoning Gemerald for a few seconds to bring in the pain. The obvious weakness here being that if you can knock Cheese out, she'd be relatively defenseless with very little options to push you off her unless she has Gemerald locked and loaded. So, the puppet character Cream and Cheese is taking character slot number 6. Character number 7, Espio the Chameleon. Like Sonic, I imagine Espio would be a rushdown character, but I imagine compared to Sonic he'd have a bigger focus on air combos and cross-ups, having a lot of dashing moves and projectiles, playing kinda like a mix of Chip from Guilty Gear and Ibuki in Street Fighter. Much like Sonic, Espio would have weak defensive options, but he'd also take Chip's ability to wall run to force corner combos into the air and escape accidentally cornering himself. Espio could also attack at range using shadow clones and shurikens, giving him the trade-off compared to his rushdown comrade Sonic, that in return for losing Sonic's parry to help him in defense, Espio has projectiles to help him win the neutral game easier than Sonic. And that's why I'm giving character number 7 to Espio. Character number 8, our next modern era character... Zavok! Nah, I'm messing with you. It's Shadow the Hedgehog, baby! Finally, we have a character we can slap the Shoto archetype to. It's generally accepted that a Shoto needs a Fireball, a Dragon Punch, and a Tatsu, and I think Shadow has moves that could fit all of these. Shadow being a Shoto could also be a good call because Shotos tend to be beginner characters, and Shadow is a fan favorite, so allowing fans to pick him up and learn him quickly would allow a lot of fans to jump right in. As much as I want to say his Fireball would be him pulling a Glock, Chaos Spear is the obvious choice here, a quintessential Fireball. As for his Tatsu, Shadow has roundhouse kicked several people during his time as a character in this franchise, so giving him a spinning kick move makes a lot of sense. The Dragon Punch move I'd make him rising up in the air with his rocket shoes while punching with chaos energy imbuing his fists. Shadow could also be packing an install super, possibly hijacking the soundtrack to become I Am All of Me? Possibly? And a second super, of course, he needs to have the Chaos Blast, I mean, come on, so with no surprise, we're giving character slot number 8 to Shadow.
Now I'm a little motivated.
Character number 9, Rouge the Bat. Let's talk about Okizeme in set play. Okizeme is the act of timing an attack to hit an opponent right as they get up from a knockdown, forcing them to block or get hit. Set play characters tend to set traps that last a few decent frames, making Okizeme fairly easy for them. My point being, Rouge would be a set play character using things such as her bombs and her fast kick attacks for some crazy mix-ups in Okizeme. Using her wings, I imagine her air combos could be pretty sick as well. She could make her opponents have to fight tooth and nail to get to play the game. She could also be like Ino from Guilty Gear, having a unique property to her dash, where it makes her slowly ascend as she flies forward, getting into her optimal position to quickly drop bombs on her opponent for some Oki action. She'd also be like Ino for a very big so that's why I'd add Rouge as a set play character. Character number 10, E123 Omega. Omega would be a general big body character, and probably would also have a focus on big inputs like half circles and charges. He'd use a wide variety of artillery and his large size to bully his opponents with a variety of options. He could push opponents with heavy gunfire and slap them up close with big heavy normals with strong pressure, in return for a generally weak combo. Charging into battles with the eyes of a killer. Yes, fear me, you worthless consumer models! This is what true power looks like! Much like Eggman, he would feel like approaching a wall, but with less focus on grappling and more just general strong offense and neutral. Omega would be a character designed to make you feel powerful, but he'd probably be quite difficult to execute with as well. Omega would be a sick big body fighter, and this is why I'm adding him to the roster.
Skip it up and that up.
Character number 11, Vector and Charmy. So I decided to get a bit experimental with this and make Vector a big body puppet character with Charmy as his puppet, so to speak. Unlike Cream, who'd use her puppet Cheese for offense but have trouble if their opponent was able to get past Cheese, Vector would be a big body that struggles to get in, and his puppet Charmy would have to use moves that focus on bringing the opponent towards him so he could get his combos going. Charmy could use his mobility and small size to get opponents from high or low and throw them back to Vector right for a big combo. Possibly, Vector could be able to position Charmy to juggle his foe between him and the bee. Of course, like Cream with Cheese, if you take out Charmy, Vector will have a hard time getting in, meaning once Charmy is gone, you'd have little trouble zoning Vector to death. Vector would make an interesting high-risk, high-reward character, and that's why him and Charmy are getting a position together. Character number 12, Blaze the Cat. I'm partially speaking from bias here, since aside from Sonic being my absolute GOAT,
It's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Blaze easily takes the number 2 slot in my favourite Sonic characters. It may have to do with Rush being my first Sonic game, but I've always been quite fond of Blaze. Anyway, Blaze with her fire prowess is prime Shoto material, much like Shadow. She can literally shoot fireballs, and her fire tornado attacks would make for a good Tatsu style move. She could possibly also have an install in Burning Blaze as well. It's all there. Much like Shadow, she would be fairly easy to pick up, but for the reason of differentiating them, maybe you could have Blaze take some notes from Soul Bad Guy and have her fireballs travel along the ground, and other small little differences to help lean into more of a Shoto rushdown hybrid, also kinda like Ken in later Street Fighter games. Blaze would be a fun addition to the roster, and that's why she's getting a slot as a Shoto character. Character number 13, Silver the Hedgehog. A fighting character archetype we haven't looked into yet is the stance character, a character that has an alternate mode that changes properties about them. I'd like for Silver to have a gimmick where he has a sort of psychokinesis meter that runs out when using his big supers. It generates over time, but if you get too aggressive, he'll leave his psycho stance and be in a weaker position, where he has to use his weaker attacks like Psycho Cut to punish opponents while getting his psychokinesis back. It's kinda similar to Nagoriyuki's Blood Gauge and Strive, but instead of wanting to avoid entering the state, you're trying to avoid leaving it. Silver, when in his psychokinesis stance, is a massive powerhouse, but if you get lost in the source, his power will run out, and Silver becomes sort of a delicate balancing act for the player. I'm hesitant to give him a Super Silver install move like the other two Super Hogs, because his gimmick is that he's already overpowered and the goal is to avoid losing said power, so to give him another power-up in the form of an install super seems a bit irresponsible from a game balance standpoint. So yeah, stance character Silver takes the 13th spot. And so, for our 14th and final spot of the base game, come on, who else? Metal Sonic, baby! So, composite characters. They come in many forms, but the general rule that defines a composite character is that they can copy moves from other fighters. And that's what Metal Sonic would do, with his Lifeform Data Copy ability, that would initially act as a command grab, but when it's landed, it gets replaced with whatever special move your opponent used last. He could potentially have multiple inputs tied to this gimmick, allowing him to steal his enemy's techniques as he pleases, and forces the opponent to learn their own matchup. A possible cool gimmick that could be that his super gauge is tied to how many of his opponent's moves he's carrying. For instance, if he's got one enemy move, he has 1 bar of super, and if he has 2, he has 2 bars of super. And using his super attacks would trade off a move, forcing you to make important hard decisions to fully utilize Metal's kit. I'd also think it'd be pretty cool for Metal to be the big arcade mode boss as well, like in good old Sonic the Fighters back in the day. It would also be reminiscent of Seth in Street Fighter 4, a composite character being the arcade mode boss. So, this is what I'd think the base roster of a Sonic fighting game might look like. But of course, what is a modern game without blatant money I mean DLC! Yeah, DLC! So what kind of DLC characters do I think this game would be packing? Well, let's discuss, shall we? For our first DLC character, I think Character 1 would have to be a pretty iconic character that's still pretty unexpected. And I think a character that would fit this balance nicely would be Sonic Adventure's very own Chaos Zero. Chaos would be a Dhalsim-style Zona character with stretchy limbs to attack opponents from a distance. He'd also be able to harass opponents with water geyser attacks and other such tricks. It would feel like a fight to actually reach Chaos to win a fight against him, not too dissimilar to some of his fights in the actual games. His super would be kind of a cutscene super where he turns into perfect chaos, laser beams the hell out of his opponents, and ending off on his big discount Godzilla roar. You know, cool stuff. DLC Character 1, Chaos Zero, baby!
Hello, how are you? I am under the water. Please help me.
DLC Character 2. So, there's a rather iconic face in the Sonic franchise still missing from the base roster, and well, we can't really not have Big the Cat, can we? Yep, Character 2, I'm going for Big the Cat. And you already know that this guy has to be the biggest, the dumbest, most glue-eating power grappler this side of Potemkin. You know that move he has in Sonic Heroes where he belly flops the ground from midair? Imagine that as a command grab. Big, crushing his opponents under his massive body. If that doesn't sound like the peak of comedy in command grab history, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. He can also pull enemies in with his fishing rod for maximum fear factor. In the games normally, Big is just a chill dude trying to fish, but here, I want him to be a monster, crushing all foes that dare stand in his path. A name feared in the community as his players feel nothing as they crush you and feast on their diet of Elmer Glue and Crayola. So yeah, I think Big as a grappler could be pretty fun. So yeah, DLC Character 2, Big.
Damn, boy, he's thick!
DLC Character 3. So, I feel like this is going to be a controversial pick, and some people will agree, and some will go, yo, why though? But you know, I feel like every wave of DLC in a fighting game needs that controversial pick to get the conversation going, which is why DLC Character 3 is Infinite the Jackal. I'll admit, I'm a bit of an Infinite apologist. Like, yeah, he's a whiny crybaby, but his design powers and theme are just too cool to go to waste. I also kind of like the idea that Infinite sucks on purpose, that him being a crybaby who decided he was done with the world because he had one failure was the whole point. Doesn't forgive his underwhelming end, but hey, it's fun to speculate. Anyway, back on topic. How would Infinite play in this game? I see a trickster zoner in Infinite, but more of a mid-range zoner than a hide on the other side of the screen zoner. He can fire off his weird illusion cube things to stun foes and use his sword for neutral game pokes, Johnny style. He could also teleport around for cross-up opportunities or to disorientate foes. Infinite would be a hard character to handle, but really satisfying when learned, so yeah, in the interest of seeing Infinite get a second wind in some form, I'm giving him a slot in this DLC roster.
You should kill yourself now and give somebody else a piece of that oxygen.
DLC number 4. So, some people may find themselves unsatisfied with Infinite, and that's fine because some people really enjoyed him, so we need a new character that everyone can get on board with. Or, get on a board with? Oh hey Jet! Jet the Hawk is Character 4, being a rushdown stance character who has 2 stances. By default, he's in a fan stance, wielding his dual fan weapons, and he's an up-close rushdown with focus on wreckers and mix-ups. But for his other stance, he hops on his extreme gear to focus on big meaty charge inputs that take him across the screen and beyond. For a super, he could call in the rest of the Babylon Rogues for a coordinated attack and slap the enemies around the place. So I think Jet would be a cool pick for us Riders fans, and well, I think we'd all love to see Jet and Sonic trash talk each other in pre-match interactions, and that's why he's going to be number 4 in our DLC roster. Our final DLC character! So, the final DLC character is an interesting one. They have to both be A, really hype, and B, something no one is expecting. So with this, I play my trump card and summon to the roster... Tangle the Lemur! Okay, for the uninitiated, Tangle the Lemur is a character from the IDW comics, being the first OC character to appear in the comic series, and she is really fun, her gimmick having a long, controllable tail for all sorts of creative attacks. Tangle also recently got a name drop in Sonic Frontiers, so hey, it's not completely off the table, and she's also appeared as a playable character in some of the Sonic phone games. I think Tangle would set an interesting standard if the game got a DLC pass too as well. Knowing IDW isn't off the table widens the possibilities greatly. Who else is possible? Whisper? Surge? Lanolin? Starline? Mimic? Who knows? As for playstyle, Tangle with her tail attacks is total combo grapple material, being able to grab people with her tail and then getting all kinds of funky combos in. Imagine, if you will, a grappler version of Milia Rage from Guilty Gear, but instead of controllable hair, it's a controllable tail. So that's why I'm closing out this roster with Tangle. So yeah, that's my prediction slash wishlist thingy for a Sonic fighting game roster. There were some other characters I'd like to see for Season Pass 2. It'd be cool to see some characters like Gamma, Whisper, Surge, Classic Sonic. Couldn't wait to see how people would respond to that one. And Mephiles, and possibly even more. My name is Ramen Ronin. I make videos on basically whatever I feel like. Feel free to like, subscribe, boost the algorithm, yada yada. You know the deal. Peace!